If someone were to ask me, like, should I have testimonials on my site for an altered state experience type of thing, I think I might actually tell them no.
It's difficult because in terms of marketing, testimonials are really powerful, and we know this that testimonials are social proof is really motivates people. Is where it's really important for me. This is like the difference between a picture of a freshly sort of completed tattoo and one that's been healed for 6 months or a year. That is the best analogy I can think of. Is that yeah, your clients feel great the day after. Well, like almost everyone does. But how do people feel a year later about it? With the benefit of having integrated everything and
Right.
calmed down and gone back to earth and
I do like that.
gone back to their real normal lives and gone, well, how do I feel about it a year later?
Hi, and welcome back again to Epic Inspire with your host, Dr. Sam Douglas, and me, Dr. Sandra Dreisbach. Um, and we're here going to talk about, the last two times we had a sort of more general conversations. We thought today would be good to talk about a specific area and the idea of testimonials. When are testimonials appropriate? Are they ever appropriate? What are some of the unique concerns that people in doing psychedelic practice or mental health around it, or even spiritual practice, need to consider testimonials and why there might be some issues around it for psychedelic work? So, Sam, do you want to open us up? Like what are some of like top level? Like we were already saying before the call, like, okay, privacy, right? Let's just go with the generic privacy concerns.
Well, I mean, the most obvious one is when someone gives a testimonial, if their full name is attached to it, or
Right.
if there's photographic evidence, or if it's a video testimonial, uh,
Yes.
then you um, you are publicly you sort of making it known that you undertook this treatment. Now this might be this might not be a problem for you, but it you know it might be, or you might later decide um, that you didn't want to do this. But yeah, it is whether it's a problem or not. It is publicly disclosing pretty
Right. As an
potentially intimate
individual,
information. Yeah, as an individual, it's
as an
like, hey,
individual, or even as a health professional, right? Like you would be publicly disclosing private information about someone's health condition or mental health condition, or at least in terms of services that they sought out. Like, and even if they don't mention the particular provider or they don't mention the particular treatment, at the end of the day, they know that they receive some sort of, you know, um, support services of that type or those types of class of categories from that person.
yeah, right, and so it's depending on the situation and the where you are, the jurisdiction, that can be quite specific. So if um, depending, it might be specific in terms of what happened. So if someone was in Oregon and they were talking about they had a great experience with a legal provider out in Oregon, you automatically get at least a rough idea of some things that were happening, even if they didn't talk about what they were getting what they had went and had the kind of the experience for. You already instantly know it was they had it with mushrooms. But out here where it's more restrictive, say in Australia, someone who, if they did have a public testimonial uh, about something, then automatically that it was either psilocybin or MDMA, and that it was either for treatment-resistant depression or PTSD. So
Right.
um,
Because
yeah,
that's
and
the
that's
only, in Australia, those are the
yeah,
only permitted
yeah,
forms
because
and the only permitted substances legally to be able to be provided for. Whereas, like in the United States, where I'm like, it's a little bit more complex because it varies by state and by region and what's actually permitted, right? And it's still very limited. Or they went abroad, right? And they went to a retreat center, or they went to the Netherlands, or other country like Jamaica, which thinking of them right now because they're going through a hurricane, but but uh, but in general, I think privacy should be a concern for any testimonial or any review. I don't care if you're putting it up on, let's say a shopping platform, which will shall not be named, right? Or any sort of like review site. Any sharing is a public sharing, and even if you're thinking it's only going to remain on that particular site, it's searchable, and especially with AI now, right? You're already risking the client, and risking yourself if you're sharing that information publicly, right? And that's part of the, I mean, it may even be part of the reason why people don't do reviews, but it's particularly vulnerable, if you're a vulnerable state, and with a particularly more taboo or emerging legal use, right? And maybe we should just go into, like, I mean, some of the privacy stuff is kind of like non-unique, right? But I think it's just, and some of them are more prone to, like, for instance, for therapy, like a lot of things you're not going to get reviews for, right? You're not, it's not like finding the right plumber, right? or the right car repair salesman. It's not as personal or as identifiable, or as, like if someone was trying to, right, like you were saying, you would identify them as having PTSD or depression. You're literally outing yourself, not just for having had the treatment or with that particular provider, but also with a condition, and getting associated that in you know
Yeah, and that's not to say that like
status.
people should have to, shouldn't be able to say that. This
No,
is not, and this is not a victim blaming thing.
no, it's a consideration. It's a
it's
consideration.
yeah, it's a consideration that I am not going to discriminate against someone if it turns out that they've sought treatment for depression or PTSD. But other people may not, be so nice. I think it's maybe not the whole, it's not the whole of it, but it is a consideration. I think it's just part of it is considering, well, all of it is considering from the perspective of someone who has had a treatment or has been a client, or or in whatever capacity, is thinking about what you want to say publicly, and thinking about when you want to say it.
Well, or even just as professionals, right? If you're a professional in the space, should it be required, or to be considered as a basis for consideration, that you have testimonials or reviews as the basis to establishing that you have a good standard of care, or that you're a good provider, or would even, or to put providers in the position of asking for testimonials, even if it was, like doing a random survey, right? That's anonymized, right? Like, there can be moves that can be made. And I know some doctors' offices and other things in the States at least do these sort of like surveys of previous clients to get that feedback and reviews, because it can be a problem on the other way where you don't get that information. So you can't identify problematic behaviors and challenges
Yeah,
that are happening.
well, I think in that case, and this is a thing it's more general. It's who controls that feedback,
That information.
that information, because say out here in Australia, well, if in my state at least, if you've been admitted to a public hospital, then within and you are there for any length of time, within a fairly short time of that, you will get, the state health department will send you a survey about, or may send you a survey about your experience, when you're admitted to the public hospital, which is great. But but it's also that it's not the doctors who treated me, in that case, for example, they're not the people who control that survey.
Right.
The survey is above them and is completely out of their hands, so it's quite independent from them. And I think that's the thing so I don't have to be like however I might have felt. I don't have to worry about hurting the feelings of anyone who treated me, or I don't have to worry, and I don't even have to worry about them ever finding out what I said specifically, because it's just taken care of by a separate entity from the actual sort of people who were doing the treatment. And in that regard, so it's not exactly, that I think is, if you can set something up like that, that's good. But then if I've been in ceremony with someone and the facilitator sends me a survey link, that's a little more personal than, do you know what I mean?
No,
And
I
I may
totally
and,
know.
and, and I may still feel, I may still, you know are they going to see my responses? Is it guaranteed to be private and confidential?
Exactly.
There's all those considerations around it. Meaning, am I going to feel pressured to give a particular answer? And we already know it's going to kind of segue into what we also, the other concern is, at what point do I do this survey and give this feedback
Yeah,
and do a
now that's this
testimonial?
is a real juicy issue. So like I think it was important for us to just at least notice like the privacy thing. Like, hey, this shouldn't be a non-issue just on the basis of privacy alone. But more problematic, at least in terms of like psychedelic practice in particular, and altered states in particular, or anything that would involve altered states of consciousness, the vulnerability, post experience, during experience, and that sort of, um, I mean, I think you were calling it like the halo, or like, I like to think of it sometimes it's like, or the integration window, or the time period in which your brain is actually the most, based on research currently, neuroplastic, right? Where you're getting the maximum benefits, but also where there's the most changes that are happening, the most transformations that are happening, which basically you're in a vulnerable state. You're in a vulnerable state, and you could say that for any sort of transformational experience, like let's say a traumatic event, right? And imagine like interviewing someone right after the traumatic event. They are in a vulnerable state. Uh, uh, and and I think what's unique with psychedelics, or at least a lot of psychedelics, depends on the psychedelic. Like ketamine tends to have a shorter window versus like psilocybin, or a really long window when it comes to like ibogaine, like up to 6 months, depending upon how you measure that window. Uh, I think it's larger than what even the sort of natural, or societal conditioning around like trauma, right? Like if someone dies, right, we have a sense that someone is grieving, and we treat it with a certain amount of, ideally we'll treat it with a certain amount of respect, and that you don't try and take advantage of people who are in a altered state, such as grieving, or, and same thing with trauma. I think what's challenging for people and society to fully grasp, because at least Western society hasn't really fully integrated it in terms of their practices or their mindset, is the fact that it's not just a very short window. It can be actually quite a very long window of vulnerability, and we don't have ways of conversing about it yet, or about communicating or respecting boundaries for people who may be, very vulnerable, not just influenceable. So imagine, there's like, I know, Jules Evans, I don't mind mentioning him, has this story about people who are doing video testimonials right the day after they've had an ayahuasca ceremony, right? And a lot of times people say, well, it's only practical to do the video testimonial then, because that's when they have them. But they're also in their most, often in their most, like sort of like positive elation, sort of post journey experience state right afterwards. And really they're at their most vulnerable, even if it's, administratively convenient to be able to videotape them. But skipping, like, even if it's just written testimonials, like it's not just the privacy consideration. It's like you're literally in a vulnerable state, and you're influenceable, and someone's saying like, okay, how was your experience, right?
Yeah, well, you know that if they're asking, and particularly when they're asking for testimonials, I think this is where it's different to feedback, is that someone's asking for a testimonial, then, well, they don't want you to do a testimonial which says, I had a terrible time, or
Right.
it was immensely,
Well, or even
uh,
if they did, they could select out that
oh
one,
yeah,
right?
that's right,
They
and this
don't, they
is,
don't need to include it. Like, okay, well, just eliminate all the bad ones,
yeah, oh yeah, that's right. This
and
is,
cherry pick.
yeah, that's right, because any feedback or review system which is controlled by the vendor will inevitably, uh, you know, there will be some people who will use that in a way that lacks transparency and misrepresents how good their services are. Not saying that all or even most people do this, but some people are going to, and and those are the people who end up often being the biggest problems. But yeah, like there's you have this window of time, and it's not even. I am a philosophical anti-reductionist, so I am reluctant to pin this on something just purely biological neuroplasticity. Uh, but any time where you've had something happen and you feel great, and because you feel great, whether this correlates with something particular going on neurologically or not, this might change the decisions you make and how readily and it's not about that people shouldn't be able to do this. If you have had a good experience, yeah, you should be able to publicly say, I had a great experience, it was with this person, they were great, they looked after me well, fine. But it's kind of about being able to kind of make a good decision about whether how you feel, and did it last, and do you really want to say that? Because the thing is that um, you might feel great for a time.
Right. And I think a lot of people shift their positions. So I think this is it too. It's like, they may have like within the first 24 hours be fine, but then like 2 days later be releasing a lot of emotional pain and trauma and experiencing again, or be experiencing, or, and processing what came up for them. Or, but I mean, I don't know, but maybe I like that what you're saying about, it's hard to discern any of this, right? And I think just the fact that it can be really messy. It's not messy in the same, like, I mean, I feel like it helps to like think of some of these other sort of things you could review. Like if I was to review, like, and I'm not going to review, but I'm like, if I was to review, like, the manufacturer of these glasses of mine, right? The state of the glasses isn't really changing for the most part, right? And yeah, I mean, we could say like whether or not people like the same color frame, or whether or not the manufacture of the lenses or things like that, right? There's a sense of more objectivity, versus like a sense of like pure subjectivity of experience and transformation, uh, and which it gets into a whole nother ball of wax, right? So it's like,
Yeah,
so just to try and just get top level. So we have privacy issues. We have issues of like the vendor being the one that collects the data. So in terms of bias, in terms of selection, and preferencing particular content versus other content, so you don't even know if that information is even accurate or an accurate representation, if they're the ones providing you that testimonial or that review. You also have the issues of concerns about respect for, I guess you could say, a conscious integrity of the individual, and whether or not they're in a good enough state, or stable enough state in order to be able to, or too vulnerable of a state that they would maybe be being taken advantage of because their capacity is diminished, right? So when we think about informed consent, right, we want to think about whether they not just are saying yes, but do they have the capacity to even say yes, right? Can they say fully no, right? And then there's like sort of more of these sort of like, yeah, I mean, we could say epistemic or other sort of issues that are coming in about like, when is the good point to get accurate information from a post psychedelic experience, and that you could actually rely on it as a basis for making a decision for someone else, and even if that we did reach that point, even if we did reach that point, uh, would it even be valuable for another person going through the exact, it may seem like the exact same substance, but it's not a pair of glasses, right? You have different traumas, different experiences, different things you're working through, um, you know, and it's not going to be, the same. It's not the same set of glasses,
no,
right?
no. It ends up being, it's hugely individual. And look, it's not that there's nothing to it, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you don't have any ability to take subjective experience into account. For me, I think a lot of it's the timing, because it's that thing where I've heard people who'd gone through some of the MAPS trials with MDMA and say things like, well, that they no longer on paper had PTSD, but they still felt terrible. You know,
Right.
that is an important, that is a really important subjective consideration, and it's a really important thing to unpack. And that's kind of what would happen if you went too far the other way, and there was no capacity to take your subjective experience into account, because a testimonial would sort that out really quickly, uh, in a way that getting someone to do a standardized, panel, necessarily, a standardized kind of checkbox, are you feeling this way in the last week,
Well, and
won't.
that kind of comes back to like the questions we had at the very beginning about in our first conversation about this stuff was, about measuring the good, but now we're talking about the good experience or the good transformation or, I agree with you. Like, we share subjective experiences all the time. And I guess we tend to value them based on the person who's sharing it, right? Like, if they're an expert, alleged expert, right? Like if we are alleged experts, we have, let's say degrees and studies and experiences that have culminated in our ability to have a better discernment or better judge of practitioners or practice, right? That's why we get put on advisory boards and things like that, right?
Yeah,
So, but it's not based on some sort of objective, quantifiable data in the same way. It's there's some aspects of metrics you could say, like a degree gives some sort of a metric, or whether you've had documented that you went to that person or you had that experience, or whether you saw them like three different times, right? Or just one time, like the
yeah,
number of times. Uh, um, and I don't and you also point out a problem with objective measures of the review experience, right? We're like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, right? How is this provider? And again, that may shift or may not accurately represent, like if they don't test as having quote unquote PTSD, but then they still, in their experience, are still not well and evaluate themselves, right, differently than what the metric is showing. I think that unfurls a whole bunch of things. I know
sorry.
we're trying to wrap up now, but no, these are the sort of things. It's like, okay, see, we try to do something simple like a testimonial, but you can see like or reviews. But I mean, hopefully you guys can kind of reflect and see why a lot of these things are challenging and why they're. Um, I think there's reason. I think in terms of concluding, like there's reason to be cautious and I think in general, if someone were to ask me, like, should I have testimonials on my site for an altered state experience type of thing, I think I might actually tell them no.
It's difficult because, in terms of marketing, testimonials are really powerful, and we know this, that testimonials are, social proof is really motivates people. But yeah, like for me, it's there is a lot of complexity there, and even if you go into when the timing is where it's really important for me. I think it's like this is like the difference between a picture of a freshly sort of completed tattoo and one that's been healed for 6 months or a year. I want
Right.
to. I want to. If I were assessing whether or not to get someone to do a tattoo for me, I want to see some examples of their work that are healed up a
Right.
year later, and see how they look. And it's kind of like that. That is the best analogy I can think of. Is that yeah, your clients feel great the day after. Well, like almost everyone does. So but how do people feel a year later about it? With the benefit of having integrated everything and
Right.
calmed down and gone back to earth and
I do like that.
gone back to their real normal lives and gone, well, how do I feel about it a year later?
I think that's
Yeah,
fair. Like if it was a year later, like if there were limits like that, like no testimonials that are less than a year. I think it would change a lot. You get a lot fewer testimonials, and you'd also, you'd know that they'd practice for at least a year in order to be able to receive that testimonial. Um, I think that's not an. I mean, it may sound unreasonable to a lot of people, given in our little instant gratification era of being able to just like look up, reviews for stuff. I mean, it kind of reminds me. I hate to even bring this up because people look it up, but like, teacher reviews, right? And I remember I looked at them at first, and then I stopped looking at them because I quickly realized what was happening was that, it wasn't an accurate representation of what was happening. Often it was a representation of the grade they received. and 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 there can be an element of that, that where that bias, and we're used to like online social media, like feedback and comments and people saying stuff out there, and people look for the 1 star, right, reviews to get some real information, and they'll look at the 5 star for, like, looking at those extremes to kind of like, okay, get a real sense, right, to get a feel, that this sort of discernment piece. But I think when it comes to this particular work, I think it's worth being cautious, to err on the side of, you know, I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe the year standard would be good. Maybe that would be helpful. I know I have reviews on my site, but none of them are for altered states, right? It's more for like the sort of coaching type of thing. And I think it does put people, practitioners, at a particular disadvantage in the marketplace when social proof and things are demanded of, and people want it and people are asking for it. I think it also requires the consumer to appreciate and understand that maybe the people who aren't putting those up there are actually showing better practice. It's not saying you're a bad practitioner for using testimonials, but I think it's worth taking with a grain of salt and to consider it as reviewing people. What kind of testimonials are they putting up there? Or if they do, and are they anonymized? Are they protecting the people's privacy? What information are they sharing in those testimonials? And could it be an artificial sort of subjective sampling, or just cherry picking from immediate post experience, or even taking advantage of people? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Any final thoughts, Sam? I know that was a bit for me.
And that was a lot. Yeah, I thought we maybe gone for long enough, but yeah, I think that's it. I think I think that covers it. I could keep going. I could keep going for a
No, no,
lot
go ahead, keep
longer.
going. So, like, I'm just trying to give
But
people like takeaways, like, it's like,
takeaways,
I mean, like,
yeah,
don't just like, I mean, for me, it's like, just don't assume that testimonials are going to be okay just because you use testimonials in other places and
or
other.
don't, or maybe don't place too much weight just on the testimonials. Like all the
Right.
things that say that if you look at something like the psychedelic safety flags document,
Yes.
there are lots of things you can look at. Uh, if you're looking for, if you're potentially looking for a practitioner or a facilitator, or or someone uh, to go, and do a ceremony with, there's heaps of stuff that you can look at, and what you know the testimonials that they might list on their website, that is a tiny part of what you would be considering if you're looking at
Yeah, maybe that's the thing, is
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's a really good point, because like, if do not use testimonials as your only basis, or even referrals as your only basis for deciding any provider, and it's worth taking the time to do some real evaluation, maybe using psychedelic safety flags or some other tools out there, to help you discern or evaluate, or get a couple different opinions, or have someone else look at someone who's not even interested in that type of work, to kind of give you some feedback to see whether or not they feel like that person is, or even just having an initial conversation with that person, and looking at multiple providers, before you select. Um, but maybe that's a topic for another time.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation about testimonials. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below. And we're looking for more inspirational providers or topics or things in the space. So feel free to share those as well. And take care.